Hello, students, and welcome to another sixth grade math episode with me, your host, Mr. Nerlich. Today, we're going to be working on lesson 1.3. And lesson 1.3 deals with absolute value. So, I'm going to pose you with this question: how can you find and use absolute value? Well, we can count the distance from 0 on a number line. Absolute value is always non-negative, so it's always a positive number and is useful for representing distance. So the definition, exact definition for absolute value is distance a number is from 0 on a number line. Okay, so now when we represent absolute value, we see that it's represented with two vertical bars. That look like this. So that here says the absolute value of 5. All right, and so then looking at our first example, absolute value of 5, we see that that does equal 5. And the reason it equals 5 is because if I draw a quick number line, and I see that after I draw up to 5, I see that if I take hops 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it took 5 hops to get to 0. Okay? And we could say hops, you could say jumps. But I guess the term that I put in your notes is jumps. So it took 5 jumps to get to 0. So that means that the absolute value of 5 is 5. Okay, well, let's look at another example. So now we're looking at example 2. And this one is the absolute value of negative 11. Okay, the absolute value of negative 11 is 11. Because even though the negative sign is attached to, so we see a negative number here, it still means that negative 11 is still only 11 jumps from 0. Just because it's on the left side of 0 does not mean that it's any further than 11 would be on the right side. So the absolute value of a negative number is always positive, which is why we always represent absolute values positive. Remember that this is a distance, and I don't know about you, but I can't measure distance negatively. If I walk backwards, I still walked some distance backwards. I didn't walk negative distance, I just went backwards. So I walked some number, just not forward. So it's still a positive number. All right, let's look at example number 3. Now, this is where sometimes absolute values can get a little tricky. So you need to be careful when you're working through the problem and you're like, oh, well, that's easy, negative 17. I already know the answer. However, what if we put a negative in front? So what does that mean? The negative of the absolute value of 17? Something like that? That's confusing. So what we do know is we know that the absolute value of negative 17 is 17. So then we know that the absolute value of this is 17. So we have 17, right? So now we have the absolute value of 17, and I still have this negative out front. And actually, hint if you're watching this video later, this is mistake number at least 1 that I'll be asking about. Okay, so there we go. So now the absolute value of negative 17 is 17, and the absolute value of 17 is still 17. So we can write it like that, but this negative is still hanging out front. And then you said, well, but Mr. Ehrlich, the negative sign, it goes away because the absolute value is always positive. However, in this instance, since the negative sign is not inside the vertical bars or the absolute value signs, then the negative sign stays there. So this actually equals negative 17. Because the absolute value of 17 is 17, and we attach the negative sign. So as long as the negative sign is not inside the absolute values, then it is not affected. Okay? All right, let's look at example number 4. There's mistake number 2. First world problems. The cord that was charging my Chromebook back here was tickling my leg. So it's gone now. It's unplugged. All right, example number 4. All right, so now for example number 4, we're really going to amp up the craziness, I guess you could say. So we have the absolute value of negative 4. But then we're putting in parentheses. Oh my gosh, I didn't know we could have parentheses with absolute values, but yes, we can. Oh, and I put another negative in front. And you go, Mr. Nerlich, if I just got rid of the parentheses, that looks like the last problem. But would I give you the same problem twice? No, of course not. So now we're going to put another negative in front. And now your mind is blown. So let's just break down the problem step by step and we'll work through it. All right, so if we look at this, I have the absolute value of negative 4. So the absolute value of negative 4, so that gets us the negative. We still have the negative on the outside, and we have the absolute value of 4. Okay, then I can say, well, the absolute value of 4 is 4, and now I have a negative in front, so that equals, so I have the negative on the outside, I have negative 4 on the inside, but now it's instead of absolute value, it's now just parentheses. And the little trick I always learned when I was in school, that if I had two negatives like this, they buddy up and they form a positive. So this guy and this gal, they form up, or however, and they form up and they say, hey, let's be friends. Okay, so they come together and now they're positive. So this actually equals 4. It's kind of like when your parents tell you no, but then they tell you, like, well, no, and then, but they say no again, like a double negative. Like, you can't not do that. And you're like, wait a minute, I can't not do that means I can do that. Great, so I can. So then you go and do it, and then your parents like, I told you can't not do that. And you say, but that's a double negative, which means I can, which is just the same here. Our double negative means it's a positive. And if we recall, we don't have to put the positive sign in front of the number because we know that a positive number does not need that plus sign in front. Okay, let's look at number 5. I know there's quite a few example problems on this, but there's not just, simply finding absolute value, because that would be too easy. That's like, we're digging a plant and we're just scratching the surface, and our plant needs to be planted deeper. So we got to dig deeper into our brains to solve more challenging problems. And so that's why we have to look at some word problems and other ways how absolute value can actually be applicable. All right, let's look at example 5. So it says Sarah's savings account balance changed by $34 one week. So let's see, example 5. Okay, so her savings account changed by $34 one week. And then it changed by negative 67. Negative $67 the next week. Okay? So which amount represents the greatest change? So I'm first looking at this problem and I say, well, 34 is positive. So that's the greatest because 34 is totally bigger than negative 67. But when we're looking at whether it's change or distance, okay, that's still, it's going to change only so much. We can't change negative. Okay, I can't change negative. If I lost $5 because I fell out of my pocket. So if I had, let's say, two $5 bills and a $5 fell out of my pocket, my change would be, I would have changed -5 because I lost $5. But I wouldn't write this. How many dollars did I lose? Did I lose? I lost $5. So I wouldn't say I lost -$5. That doesn't make sense. You can't have negative amounts of money. Therefore, when we look at these problems, we have a change, we have to do the absolute value. So now that we know we have to do the absolute value, we've broken down our problem. We have the absolute value of 34, which equals something, and the absolute value of negative 67, which equals something. And we know it's always positive, so it's 34. And we know that since the negative sign is inside the absolute value sign, then the answer is 67. So actually, the greatest change was when Sarah lost $67. Now, maybe it's her savings account, so maybe she bought herself a birthday present or had to buy Christmas presents, so she had to take money out of her savings to pay for it. Okay, I have some problems for you to try on your own. Good luck. The biggest thing you want to remember is that absolute value is a distance from zero and it is always positive. And don't let the negative signs trip you up. Just work through the problem and think about it and look back at your notes if you need to refer to them. Okay, this is your host, Mr. Nerlich, signing off. Keep soaring, Falcons, and have a wonderful day.